little house, 2 stories, a couple of young trees in the front yard, just now starting to rival the house for height. There was a minivan in the driveway and a basketball goal, well used. The lawn was grown rather long, but all the recent rains had left good excuse for that. The street was a quiet one, and it took me a moment to realize that most of the houses on it were not occupied. For sale signs stood in many of the yards, sparse curtains draped over empty, gaping windows like cobwebs. There wasn't a lot of birdsong for a street with so many trees, and I couldn't hear any dogs barking as I walked along the sidewalk. Overhead, clouds were thickening, building up for another thunderstorm. Taken all together, it had the feel of someplace blighted, a place where a black wizard had set up shop. I swung up through the cell's yard into the front door. I rang the bell and waited. There was no answer. I knocked. I leaned on the doorbell. Still no answer. I tightened my jaw and looked around. I didn't see anyone. So I turned back to the door, preparing to use a spell to open it. Instead, the door swung open, maybe 6 inches. Monica Sells stood inside, peering out at me with her green eyes. She was dressed in jeans, a plain flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and her hair was covered by a bandana. She wore no makeup. She looked both older and more appealing that way. I think maybe because it was a more natural look for her, something that was closer to the sort of person she really was, rather than the nicer clothes and jewelry she'd worn when she visited my office. Her face went pale, her lips bloodless. "I don't have anything to say to you, Mr. Dresden," she said at once. "Go away." "I can't do that," I said. She started to swing the door shut, but I jammed the end of my staff into the doorway, keeping it from closing. "I'll call the police," she said, her voice strained. She leaned against the door, trying to keep me from coming in. "Do it," I growled. Then I played on an instinct, a hunch. "And I'll tell them about you and your husband." I was taking a shot in the dark, but what the hell? She didn't know I didn't know what the hell was going on. My instinct paid off. I heard her suck in a breath and felt her resistance on the door sag a little. I put my shoulder to the door, leaned on it hard, and she stepped back from me in surprise. I don't think she'd expected me to physically force my way into her house. Hell, I hadn't expected me to do that. I hadn't realized how angry I was until I saw the look of panic on her face when she looked up at me. I didn't know what I looked like, but it must not have been friendly. I stopped and closed my eyes. I took a deep breath and tried to get a handle on my anger. It wouldn't profit me anything to lose control. That was when she went for the stunner. I heard her move, open my eyes in time to see her snatch a black plastic case the size of a cellular phone from the piano and lunge toward me. Her face was pale, frightened. Blue lightning danced between the 2 tines of the stunner as she shoved it at my stomach. I swept my staff upright from right to left, and the buzzing device went past me, along with her lunge, striking the door frame behind me. I slipped past her into the living room, turning to face her as she recovered and turned around. "I won't let you hurt them," she snarled. "Not you, not anyone. I'll kill you before you touch them, wizard." And then she was coming at me again, fury replacing the terror in her eyes, and grim determination to succeed. It made me think of Murphy for a second. For the first time she was looking me in the face. For the first time she forgot to keep her eyes averted from mine, and in that second I saw inside her. Things seemed to slow down for a moment. I had time to see the color of her eyes, the structure of her face, to recognize where I'd seen them before, why she had looked familiar to me. I had time to see, behind her eyes, the fear and the love that motivated every move she made, every step she took. I saw what had moved her to come to me, why she was afraid. I saw her grief, and I saw her pain. And the pieces all fell into place. Knowing the emotions that drove her, the terrible love that she was showing even now, it all seemed perfectly obvious. I felt stupid for not figuring it out days ago. "Stop," I said, or tried to say, before she thrust the stunner at my chest. I dropped the staff and rod alike in a clatter of falling wood and caught her wrists in both of my hands. She pushed the stunner up my face, and I let her do it. It got within 3 inches of me, the light bright in my eyes. Then I drew in a breath and puffed it out into the stunner, along with an effort of will. There was a spark, a little puff of smoke, and it went dead in her hands, like every other electronic gizmo seemed to do whenever I came around. Hell, I was surprised it'd taken so long to stop working. And even if it hadn't, it wasn't any trouble for me to hex it into uselessness. I continued holding her wrist, but the driving tension behind her arm had eased away to nothing. She was staring at my face, her eyes wide with shock from the meeting of our gazes. She started shaking and dropped the useless stunner from limp fingers. It clattered to the floor. I let go of her, and she just stared at me. I was shaking, too. A soul gaze is never something pleasant or simple. God, sometimes I hated that I had to live with that. I hadn't wanted to know that she'd been abused as a child, that she'd married a man who provided her with more of the same as an adult, that the only hope or light that she saw in her life was her 2 children. There hadn't been time to see all of her reasons, all of her logic. I still didn't know why she had drawn me into this entire business. But I knew that it was, ultimately, because she loved her 2 kids. And that was all I really needed. That and one other connection, the nagging resemblance to someone that I noticed in her at my office. The rest fell into place from there. It took Monica Sells a moment to recover herself. She did it with remarkable speed, as though she were a woman used to drawing on a mask again after having it knocked off. I'm sorry, Mr. Dresden. She lifted her chin and regarded me with a fragile, wounded pride. What do you want here? A couple of things, I told her. I stooped down to recover my staff, my rod. I want my lock of hair back. I want to know why you came to me last Thursday, why you dragged me into this mess. I want to know who killed Tommy Tom and Jennifer Stanton and Linda Randall. Monica's eyes went even duller. Her face paled. Linda's dead. Last night, I told her. And someone's planning on taking me out the same way the next chance they get. Outside, in the far distance, thunder rumbled. Another storm was in the works, slowly building. When it got to town, I was a dead man. It was as simple as that. I looked back to Monica Sells, and it was all over her face. She knew about the storm just as well as I did. She knew about it, and there was a sort of sad and weary frustration in her eyes. You have to go, Mr. Dresden, she said. You can't be here when... You've got to go, before it's too late. I stepped toward her. You're the only chance I have, Monica. I asked you once before to trust me. You've got to do it again. You've got to know that I'm not here to hurt you or your... A door opened in the hallway behind Monica. A girl, on the gawky end of pre-adolescence, with hair the color of her mother's, leaned out into the hallway. Mom, she said in a quavering voice. Mom, are you okay? Do you want me to call police? A boy, perhaps a year or 2 younger than his sister, poked his head out too. He was carrying a well-used basketball in his arms, turning it in nervous little gestures. I looked back to Monica. Her eyes were closed. There were tears coming, trailing down her cheeks. It took her a moment, but she drew in a breath and spoke to the girl in a clear, calm voice, without turning around. I'm fine, she told them. Jenny, Billy, get back into the room and lock the door. I mean it. But, Mom, the boy began. Now, Monica said. Her voice was strained. Jenny put a hand on her brother's shoulder. Come on, Billy. She looked at me for just a moment. Her eyes were too old and too knowing for a child her age. Come on. The 2 vanished back into the room, closed the door, and locked it behind them. Monica waited until they were gone, and then broke down into more tears. Please, Mr. Dresden, you have to go. If you're here when the storm comes, if he knows... She buried her face in her hands and made a quiet, croaking sound. I stepped over closer to her. I had to have her help. No matter how much pain she was in, no matter what kind of agony she was going through, I had to have her help. And I thought I knew the names to invoke to get it. Sometimes I can be such a bastard. Monica, please. I'm up against a wall. I'm out of options. Everything I have leads here, to you. I don't have time to wait. I need your help before I wind up just like Jennifer and Tommy and Linda. I sought her eyes, and she looked up at me without turning her gaze away. Please help me. I watched her eyes, saw the fear and grief and the weariness there. I saw her look at me as I leaned on her, demanded more out of her than she could afford to give. All right, she whispered. She turned away and walked toward her kitchen. All right, I'll tell you what I know, wizard. But there's nothing I can do to help you. She paused in the doorway and looked back at me. Her words fell with the weight of conviction, simple truth. There's nothing anyone can do. Now.
Please insert the next CD to continue this story.
Monica Sells had a cheerful, brightly colored kitchen. She collected painted cartoon cows, and they ranged over the walls and cabinet doors of the room in a cheerful bovine sort of indolence. The refrigerator was covered with crayon drawings and report cards. There was a row of colored glass bottles on the windowsill. I could hear wind chimes outside, restlessly stirred by a cool rising wind. A big friendly cow clock on the wall swung its tail back and forth. Tick, tick, tick. Monica sat down at the kitchen table. She drew up her legs beneath her and seemed to relax by a few degrees. Her kitchen, I sensed, was her sanctuary, the place where she retreated when she was upset. It was lovingly maintained, sparkling clean. I let her relax as long as I could, which wasn't long. I could almost feel the air building up to greater tension, the storm brewing in the distance. I couldn't afford to play with kid gloves. I was just about to open my mouth and start pushing when she said, "Ask questions, Wizard. I'll answer them. I wouldn't even know where to start myself." She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anything. "All right," I said. I leaned on the kitchen counter. "You know Jennifer Stanton, don't you? You related to her." Her expression didn't change. "We have our mother's eyes," she confirmed. "My little sister was always the rebel. She ran away to become an actress, but became a whore instead. It suited her in her own way. I always wanted her to stop, but I don't think she wanted to. I'm not sure she knew how." "Have the police contacted you yet about her death?" "No. They called my parents down in St. Louis. They haven't realized yet that I live in town. Someone will notice soon, I'm sure." I frowned. "Why didn't you go to them? Why did you come to me?" She looked over at me. "The police can't help me, Mr. Dresden. Do you think they would believe me? They'd look at me like I was some kind of lunatic if I went on babbling about magic spells and rituals." She grimaced. "Maybe they'd be right. Sometimes I wonder if I am crazy." "So you came to me," I said. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" "How could I?" she asked. "How could I walk into an office of someone I didn't even know and tell him—" She swallowed and squeezed her eyes shut over more tears. "And tell me what, Monica?" I asked. I kept my voice soft. "Who killed your sister?" Wind chimes tinkled outside. The friendly cow clock went tick, tick, tick. Monica Sells drew in a long, shuddering breath and closed her eyes. I saw her gathering up the frayed threads of her courage, knotting them as tightly as she could. I knew the answer already, but I needed to hear it from her. I needed to be sure. I tried to tell myself that it would be good for her to face such a thing, just to say it out loud. I wasn't sure I bought that. Like I said, I'm not a very good liar. Monica squeezed her hands into tight fists and said, "God help me, God help me. It was my husband, Mr. Dresden. It was Victor." I thought she would dissolve into tears, but instead she just hunched tighter into her little defensive ball, as though she expected someone to start hitting her. "That's why you wanted me to find him," I heard myself say. "That's why you sent me to the lake house to look for him. You knew he was there. You knew that if you sent me out there, he would see me." My voice was quiet, not quite angry, but the words pounded around Monica Sells like sledgehammers, throwing up chips of concrete. She flinched from each of them. "I had to," she moaned. "God, Mr. Dresden, you don't know what it was like. And he was getting worse. He didn't start as a bad man, really, but he kept getting worse and worse. And I was afraid." "For your kids," I said. She nodded and rested her forehead on her knees, and then the words started spilling out of her. Slowly at first, and then in a greater and greater rush, as if she couldn't hold back the immense weight of them any longer. I listened. I owed it to her for walking all over her feelings, for forcing her to talk to me. "He was never a bad man, Mr. Dresden, you have to understand. He worked hard. He worked so hard for us to give us something better. I think it was because he knew that my parents had been so wealthy. He wanted to give me just as much as they could have, and he couldn't. It would make him so frustrated, so angry. Sometimes he would lose his temper, but it wasn't always so bad. He could be so kind sometimes, too. I thought that maybe the children would help him to stabilize. It was when Billy was about 4 that Victor found the magic. I don't know where. But he started getting obsessed with it. He brought home books and books, strange things. He put a lock on the door to the attic, and after dinner he'd vanish up there. Some nights he wouldn't come to bed. Some nights I could hear the things up there, voices, or things that weren't voices. She shuddered. He started to get worse. He'd get angry, and things would happen. Little things. The drapes would catch on fire at one edge, or things would fly off the walls and break. She turned her haunted gaze toward her cute, tacky cows for a moment, as though assuring herself that they were still there. He'd scream at us for no reason, or burst out laughing for no reason. He saw things I couldn't see. I thought he was going crazy. But you never confronted him, I said quietly. She shook her head. No, God forgive me, I couldn't. I had gotten used to being quiet, Mr. Dresden, to not making a fuss. She took a deep breath and continued. Then one night he came to me and woke me up. He made me drink something. He told me that it would make me see, make me understand him, that if I drank, I would see the things he saw, that he wanted me to understand him, that I was his wife. This time she did start crying, tears that coursed silently down her cheeks to the corners of her mouth. Something else clicked solidly into place where I'd already thought it would go. The 3-eye, I said. She nodded. And I saw things, Mr. Dresden. I saw him. Her face screwed up and I thought she was going to vomit. I could sympathize. To have the third sight suddenly open to you like that, not knowing what it was, what was happening to you, to look at the man you had wed, who had given you children, and to see him for what he truly was, obsessed with power, consumed by greed. It had to have been hell. And it would remain with her, always. She would never find the memory fading, never find the comfort and solace of years putting comfortable padding between her and the image of her husband as a monster. She continued, speaking in a low, hurried rush. I wanted more, even when it was over, and though it was horrible, I wanted more. I tried not to let it show, but he could tell. He looked into my eyes, and he knew, Mr. Dresden, like you did just now. And he started to laugh, like he just won the lottery. He kissed me. He was so happy, and it made me sick. He started making more of the drug, but he could never make enough. It drove him berserk, furious, and then he started to realize that when he was angry, he could do more. He'd look for excuses to be angry. He'd drive himself into rages, but it still wasn't enough. She swallowed. That's when... I thought of the frightened pizza drivers and the fairy commentary on the human sporting. That's when he realized he could touch other people's emotions, too, I said. Use them to help power his magic. She nodded and curled herself in on herself. It was only me at first. He'd frighten me. And afterwards, I would be so exhausted. Then he found out that, for what he was doing, lust worked better. So he started looking around. For backers, investors, he called them. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Please, Mr. Dresden, you have to understand, it wasn't always so bad. There were moments that I could almost see him again, that I thought he was going to come back to us. I tried to look on her with compassion, but I wasn't sure I felt anything but fury. That someone, anyone, should treat his family that way, or anyone else for that matter. My feelings showed in my face because Monica quickly averted her eyes and huddled down in fear. She spoke in a hurried voice, as though to put off my rage, in the voice of a woman who has put off rage with desperate words more than once. He found the Becketts. They had money, and he told them that if they would help him, then he would help them get their vengeance on Johnny Marconi, for their daughter. They put their trust in him. They gave him all the money he needed. I thought of the Becketts and their lean, hungry faces. I thought of Mrs. Beckett's dead eyes. And he started the rituals, the ceremony. He said he needed our lust. Her eyes shifted left and right, and the sickened look on her face grew deeper. It wasn't so bad. He would close the circle, and all of a sudden,
nothing mattered. Nothing but flesh. I would lose myself for a while. It was almost like an escape.
She rubbed her hands on the leg of her jeans as if trying to wipe something foul off of it.
But it wasn't enough. That's when he started talking to Jennifer. He knew what she did, that she would know the right kind of people, like her, like Linda. Linda introduced him to Marconi's man. I don't know his name, but Victor promised him something that was enough to bring him into the circle. I didn't have to go all the time then. Either Jenny or I would stay with the children. Victor made the drug. We started to make money. Things got better for a while. As long as I didn't think too much.
Monica took a deep breath.
That's when Victor started getting darker. He called demons. I saw them. He said he needed more power. He was hungry for it. It was horrible, like watching a starving animal forever pacing. And I saw him start looking at the children, Mr. Dresden. It made me afraid, the way he looked at them. Sometimes I knew.
This time she buckled and doubled toward the floor with a groan. She shuddered and wept, out of control.
Oh, God, my babies.
I wanted to go over to her, to offer her my hand to hold, to put an arm over her shoulders, and to tell her that it would be all right. But I knew her now. I had looked inside. It would make her scream. God, Harry, I thought, haven't you tortured this poor woman enough? I rummaged in cabinets until I found a glass, ran cold water from the sink, poured it into the glass, then went over and put it down by her. She straightened in the chair and took the glass between shaking hands. She took a sip and spilled a little onto her chin. I'm sorry, I said. It was all I could think of to say. If she heard me, it didn't show. She sipped water, then continued, as if desperate to finish, to get the taste of the words out of her mouth.
I wanted to leave him. I knew he'd be furious, but I couldn't let the children stay close to him. I tried to talk to Jenny about it. She took matters into her own hands. My little sister, trying to protect me. She went to Victor and told him that if he didn't let me leave, she'd go to the police and to Johnny Marconi. She'd tell them all about him.
He killed her, I said. Hell, Victor hadn't needed any of Jennifer Stanton's hair to kill her. Any kind of sample of bodily fluids would have worked. With the ceremonies of lust that he'd been holding, he'd have ample opportunity to collect from poor Jennifer Stanton. Maybe he'd even had her bring him a sample from Tommy Tom. Or maybe Jennifer and Tommy Tom had just been too close, as they were making love, for the spell to affect just one of them when he killed them.
He killed her,
Monica confirmed. Her shoulders slumped with a sudden weariness.
That's when I came to you, because I thought you might be able to see, be able to do something, before he hurt my babies, before he killed somebody else. And now Linda's dead too, and soon you, Mr. Dresden. You can't stop him. No one can.
Monica, I said. She shook her head and curled up in a miserable little ball.
Go, she said. Oh, God, please go, Mr. Dresden. I don't want to see it when he kills you, too.
My heart felt like a lump of cold wax in my chest. I wanted so badly to tell her that everything would be all right. I wanted to dry her tears and tell her there was still joy in the world, that there was still light and happiness. But I didn't think she'd hear me. Where she was, there was nothing but endless, hopeless darkness, full of fear, pain, and defeat. So I did the only thing I could. I withdrew in silence and left her to her weeping. Perhaps it would help her start to heal. But to me, it only sounded like pieces of glass falling from a shattered window. As I walked toward the front door, a little motion to the left caught my eye. Jenny Sells stood in the hallway like a silent wraith. She regarded me with luminous green eyes like her mother's, like the dead aunt whose namesake she was. I stopped and faced her, I'm not sure why. "You're the wizard," she said quietly. "You're Harry Dresden. I saw your picture in the newspaper once, the Arcane." I nodded. She studied my face for a long minute. "Are you going to help my mom?" It was a simple question. But how do you tell a child that things just aren't that simple? That some questions just don't have simple answers, or any answer at all? I looked back into her too knowing eyes, and then quickly away.
I didn't want her to see what sort of person I was. The things I'd done, she didn't need that. I'm going to do everything I can to help your mom. She nodded. Do you promise? I promised her. She thought that over for a moment, studying me, and then she nodded. My daddy used to be one of the good guys, Mr. Dresden, but I don't think that he is anymore. Her face looked sad. It was a sweet, unaffected expression. Are you going to kill him? Another simple question. I don't want to, I told her, but he's trying to kill me, and I might not have any choice. She swallowed and lifted her chin. I love my Aunt Jenny, she said. Her eyes brightened with tears. Mama won't say, and Billy's too little to figure it out, but I know what happened. She turned, with more grace and dignity than I could have managed, and started to leave, and then said quietly, I hope you're one of the good guys, Mr. Dresden. We really need a good guy. I hope you'll be all right. And then she vanished down the hall in bare, silent feet. I left the house in the suburbs as quickly as I could. My legs drove me down the oddly silent sidewalk and back to the corner where the cabbie was waiting, meter ticking away. I got into the cab and told the cabbie to drive me to the nearest payphone. Then I closed my eyes and struggled to think. It was hard through all the pain I felt. Maybe I'm stupid or something, but I hate to see people like Monica, like little Jenny, hurting like that. There shouldn't be pain like that in the world. And every time I run into it, it makes me furious. Furious and sad. I didn't know if I wanted to scream or cry. I wanted to pound Victor Sell's face in. I wanted to crawl into bed and hide under the covers. I wanted to give Jenny Sells a hug and tell her that everything would be all right. And I was still afraid, all tight and burning in my gut. Victor Sells, of the shadows and demons, was going to kill me as soon as the storm rolled in. Think, Harry, I told myself. Think, damn it. The cabbie gave me an odd look in the rearview mirror. I stuffed down all the feelings, all the fear, all the anger into a tight little ball. I didn't have time to let those feelings blind me now. I needed clarity, focus, purpose. I needed a plan. Murphy might be able to help me. I could tip her off about the lake house and send in the cavalry. They might find a stockpile of 3-eye there. They could then arrest Victor like any other drug dealer. But there were too many holes in that plan. What if Victor wasn't keeping his stores in the lake house? What if he eluded the police? Monica and her children would be in danger if he did. Not only that, what if Murphy didn't listen to me? Hell, the judge might not issue a warrant to search private property on the word of a man who probably had a warrant for his own arrest out now. Not only that, but the bureaucracy involved in working with the authorities in Lake Providence, on a Sunday no less, would slow things down. It might not happen in time to save me from having my heart torn out. No, I couldn't rely on the police. If this was any other time, if I was held in less suspicion by the White Council, I would report Victor Sells to them and let them handle the whole thing. They're not exactly soft on people using magic like Victor used it, to call up demons, to kill, to produce drugs. He had probably broken every law of magic. The White Council would waste no time in sending someone like Morgan to wipe Victor out. But I couldn't do that either. I was already under suspicion, thanks to Morgan's narrow-minded blindness. The council was already meeting at sunrise on Monday. Some of the other members of the council might listen to me, but they would be traveling now. I had no way of reaching any of those who were sympathetic to me, no way of asking for help. There wasn't time, in fact, to try to round up any of my usual allies. So, I concluded, it was up to me, alone. It was a sobering thought. I had to go confront Victor Sells, as strong a practitioner as I'd ever gone up against, in his own place of power at the lake house. Not only that, but I had to do it without breaking any of the laws of magic. I couldn't kill him with sorcery, but somehow I had to stop him. The odds seemed really good that I was going to get killed, whether I tried to face him or not. To hell with it, then. If I was going to go out, it wasn't going to be while I was lying around moaning and bitching about how useless it all was. If Victor Sells wanted to take out Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden, he was going to have to shove his magic right down my throat. This decision cheered me up somewhat. At least I knew what I was doing now, where I was going. What I needed was an edge, I decided, something to pull on Victor, something he wouldn't expect. Now that I knew who he was, I understood the magic I had run into outside of my apartment a little better. It had been potent, deadly, but not sophisticated, not well controlled. Victor was powerful, strong, a natural mage, but he wasn't practiced. He didn't have any training. If only I had something of his, something like his own hair, that I could use against him. Maybe I should have checked the bathroom at Monica's, but I had the feeling he wouldn't be that careless. Anyone who spends time thinking about how to use that sort of thing against people is going to be doubly paranoid that no one have the opportunity to use it against him. And then it struck me. I did have something of Victor's. I had a scorpion talisman, back in the drawer of my desk in the office. It was one of his own devices, something close and familiar. I could use it to create a bond to him, to sort of judo his own power back against him, and beat him with it, hands down, no questions asked. I might have a chance yet. I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The cabbie pulled into a gas station parked next to the payphone. I told him to wait for a minute and got out, fumbling a quarter from my pockets to make the call. If it did turn out that I wouldn't live to see tomorrow, I wanted to make damn sure that the hounds of hell would be growling at Victor Sell's heels. I dialed Murphy's number down at the station. It rang several times, and finally someone answered. The line was scratchy, noisy. I could barely make out who it was. "Murphy's desk, this is Carmichael." "Carmichael," I said loudly into the phone. "It's Harry Dresden. I need to talk to Murphy." "What?" Carmichael said. There was a squeal of static. Damn it, the phones go to hell on me at the worst times. "I can't hear you. Murphy? You want Murphy? Who is this? Anderson, is that you?" "It's Harry Dresden," I shouted. "I need to talk to Murphy." Carmichael grunted. "I can't hear you, Andy. Look, Murphy's out. She took that warrant down to Harry Dresden's office to take a look around." "She what?" I said. "Harry Dresden's office," Carmichael said. "She said she'd be back soon. Look, this connection is awful. Try calling back." He hung up on me. I fumbled for another quarter, my hands shaking, and dialed my own office number. The last thing I needed was for Murphy to go poking around my office, maybe impounding things. If she stuck the scorpion in evidence, I was done for. I'd never be able to explain it to her in time. And if she saw me face to face, she might be furious enough with me just to have me slapped into holding and left there overnight. If that happened, I'd be dead by morning. My phone rang a couple of times, then Murphy answered. The line was blissfully clear. "Harry Dresden's office." "Murph," I said, "thank God. Look, I need to talk to you." I could practically feel her anger. "Too late for that now, Harry. You should have come to talk to me this morning." I heard her moving around. She started opening drawers. "Damn it, Murph," I said, frustrated. "I know who the killer is. Look, you've got to keep out of that desk. It could be dangerous." I thought I'd been going to tell her a lie, but I realized, as I said it, that I was telling the truth. I remembered seeing, or thinking I had seen, movement from the talisman when I examined it before. Maybe I hadn't been imagining things. "Dangerous," Murphy growled. I heard her scattering pens about the top drawer of my desk, moving things around. The talisman was in the drawer beneath. "I'll tell you what's dangerous. Fucking with me is dangerous, Dresden. I'm not playing some kind of game here, and I can't trust what you say anymore." "Murphy," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "you've got to trust me. One more time. Stay out of my desk, please." There was silence for a moment. I heard her draw a breath and let it out through her mouth. Then Murphy said, her voice hard, professional, "Why, Dresden? What are you hiding?" I heard her open the middle drawer. There was a clicking sound, and a startled oath from Murphy. The receiver clattered to the floor. I heard gunshots, shockingly loud, whining ricochets, and then a scream. "Damn it!" I shouted at the phone. "Murphy!" I slammed the phone down and sprinted back to the cab. The cabbie blinked at me. "Hey, buddy, where's the fire?" I slammed the door shut and gave him the address to my office. Then I thrust all of my remaining cash in him and said, "Get me there 5 minutes ago." The cabbie blinked at the money, shrugged, and said, "Crazy. Cabbies get all the crazies." And he tore out into the street, leaving a cloud of smoke behind us. The building was locked on Sunday.
I jammed my key in the lock, twisted it hard to open it, and jerked the keys out again. I didn't bother with the elevator, just hurled up the stairs as quickly as I could. 5 stories worth of stairs. It took me less than a minute, but I begrudged every second of it. My lungs were burning, and my mouth was dry as sand when I reached the 5th floor and sprinted down the hallway to my office. The halls were quiet, empty, dim. The only light came from the exit signs and from the overcast day outside. Shadows stretched and settled in the closed doorways. The door to my office was ajar. I could hear my ceiling fan squeaking on its mounting underneath the labored wheezing of my own breath. The overhead light wasn't on, but the reading light on my desk must have been on, because the yellow light outlined the doorway and laid a swath of gold across the floor of the hall. I stopped at the threshold. My hands were shaking so much I could hardly hold my staff and rod. "Murphy?" I called out into the office. "Murphy? Can you hear me?" My voice was hoarse, breathless. I closed my eyes and listened. I thought I heard 2 things. The first was a labored breath, with a faint moan on the exhale. Murphy. The second was a dry, scuttling sound. I could smell gunpowder in the air. I clenched my jaw in sudden anger. Victor Sell's little beastie, whatever it was, had hurt my friend. Like hell, I was going to stand out there and give it the run of my office. I shoved the door open with my staff and stalked into my office, my blasting rod extended before me and words of power upon my lips. Directly in front of my office door is a table arranged with a series of pamphlets with titles like "Real Witches Don't Float So Good" and "Magic in the 21st Century." I had written some of them myself. They were meant for the curious, for people who just wanted to know about witches and magic. I squatted for a moment, blasting rod aimed beneath the table, but saw nothing. I rose again, looking back and forth, rod still ready. To the right of the door is a wall lined with filing cabinets and a couple of easy chairs. The cabinets were shut, but something could have been hiding beneath one of the chairs. I slid to my left, checking behind the door to the office, and pressed my shoulders to the wall, keeping my eyes on the room. My desk is in the back corner, to the right when you come in the door, diagonal from it. It's a corner office. There are windows on either side of the outside walls. My shades were, as usual, drawn. The overhead fan in the center of the room spun around with a tired little groan on every rotation. I kept my eyes moving, my senses alert. I choked down my anger ferociously and made myself remain cautious. Whatever had happened to Murphy, I wouldn't do her any good by letting it happen to me, too. I moved slowly, carefully, my blasting rod held ready. I could see Murphy's tennis shoes behind my desk. She looked like she was curled on her side from the way her feet were angled, but I couldn't see the rest of her. I pushed forward, striding to the center of the brick wall, keeping my blasting rod level like a gun on the floor behind the desk as it became visible. Murphy lay there, curled on her side, her golden hair in an artless sprawl about her head, her eyes open and staring blindly. She was dressed in jeans, a button-down shirt, and a Cubs satin jacket. Her left shoulder was stained with a blot of blood. Her gun lay next to her a couple feet away. My heart stepped up into my throat. I heard her take a little breath and groan when she let it out. "Murphy," I said, then louder, "Murphy!" I saw her stir, a fitful little motion that was in response to my voice. "Easy, easy," I told her. "Relax. Don't try to move. I'm going to try to help you." I knelt down near her, very slowly, watching the room all around. I didn't see anything. I set my staff aside and felt her throat. Her pulse was racing, thready. There was not enough blood for it to be a serious injury, but I touched her shoulder. Even through the jacket I could feel the swelling. "Harry," Murphy rasped, "is that you?" "It's me, Murphy," I told her, setting my blasting rod aside and slowly reaching for the phone. The middle drawer of my desk, where the scorpion talisman had been, was open and empty. "Just hang on. I'm going to call an ambulance to help you." "Can't believe it, you bastard," Murphy wheezed. I felt her stir a little. "You set me up." I drew the phone down and dialed 911. It was silent. "Hush, Murph, you've been poisoned. You need help, fast." The 911 operator came on and took my name and address. I told her to send an ambulance prepared to treat someone for poisoning, and she told me to stay on the line. I didn't have time to stay on the line. Whatever had done this to Murphy, it was still around somewhere. I had to get her out of there, and then I had to recover Victor's talisman to be able to use it against him when I went out to the lake house. Murphy stirred again, and then I felt something hard and cruel flick around my wrist and clitter-clat shut. I blinked and looked down at her. Murphy's jaw was set in a stubborn line as she clicked the other end of the handcuffs around her own wrist. "You're under arrest," she wheezed. "You son of a bitch. Wait till I get you into the interrogation room. You aren't going anywhere." I just stared at her, stunned for a moment. "Murph," I just stammered. "My God, you don't know what you're doing." "Like hell," she said, her lip lifting in a ghost of its usual snarl. She twisted her head around, grimaced in pain, squinted at me. "You should have talked to me this morning. Got you now, Dresden." She broke off in a panting gasp and added, "You jerk." "You stubborn bitch from hell." I felt at a loss for a second, then shook my head. "I've got to get you out of here before it comes back," I said, and stooped over forward to try to gather her up. That was when the scorpion exploded towards me from the shadows beneath my desk. A harsh burst of dry, scuttling motion. It wasn't a bug I could squish with my fingers anymore. It was the size of a large terrier, all brown and glinting. It was almost too fast to see coming. I convulsed away from it and saw the flash of its tail, saw its stinger whip forward and miss my eye by a hair's breadth. Something cool and wet speckled my cheek, and my skin started to burn. Venom. My startled motion had made my leg jerk and kicked my staff and rod away from me. I rolled after the ladder desperately. Murphy's handcuffs brought me up short, and both of us made sounds of discomfort as the steel bands cut at the base of our hands. I stretched for the rod, felt the smooth roundness of it on my fingertips, and then there was another scuttling sound, and the scorpion came at my back. The rod squirted out from my grasping fingertips and rolled away, out of reach. I didn't have time for a spell, but I grabbed at the middle drawer of my desk, jerked it all the way out of its frame, and barely managed to shove it between the scorpion and myself. There was a hiss of air and a smacking sound of breaking wood. The scorpion's stinger plunged through the bottom of the drawer and stuck fast. A crab claw pincher gouged a hole through my sweatpants and into my leg. I screamed and hurled the drawer away. The scorpion, its tail still stuck, went with it. They both landed in a heap a few feet away. "Won't do you any good, Dresden," Murphy moaned incoherently. She must have been too far gone from the poison to understand what was going on. "I've got you. Stop fighting it and get some answers from you now." "Sometimes, Murph," I panted, "you make things a little harder than they need to be. Anyone ever tell you that?" I bent down to her and slipped my cuffed wrist beneath her arm and around her back, drawing her own arm back with me, my right arm and her left bound by the handcuff. "My ex-husband," she moaned. I strained and lifted us both up off the ground, then started hobbling towards the door. I could feel the blood on my leg, the pain where the scorpion had ripped it, hot and hateful. "What's happening?" Confusion and fear trembled in Murphy's voice. "Harry, I can't see." Shit. The poison was getting to her. The poison of the common brown scorpion found all over most of the United States isn't much more venomous than the sting of a bumblebee. Of course, most bumblebees aren't the size of a family dog, either. Murphy wasn't a big person. If a lot of poison had been introduced into her system, the odds were against her. She needed medical attention, and she needed it immediately. If my hands had been free, I would have taken up my staff and rod and done battle. But I didn't like the odds, tied to Murphy. Even if I could keep the thing off me, it might land on her, sting her again, and put an end to her. I was at a bad angle to search for her keys, and I didn't have time to go down the ring trying them on the handcuffs one by one. Any magic that I could work fast enough to shatter the cuffs in time would probably kill me with flying shrapnel, and there wasn't time to work out a gentle escape spell. Damn it, Dad, I thought. I wish you'd lived long enough to show me how to slip out of a pair of handcuffs. "Harry," Murphy repeated, her voice thready. "What's happening? I can't see." I saved my breath and lugged Murphy towards the door without answering her. Behind me there was a furious scraping and clicking. I looked back over my shoulder. The scorpion's stinger was stuck fast in the drawer, but the thing was rapidly ripping the wood to shreds with its pinchers and legs. I gulped, turned, and hobbled out of the office and down the hall with Murphy. I managed to swing the door to my office shut with one foot. Murphy's legs did little to support her, and the difference in our heights made the trip awkward as hell. I was straining to keep her upright and moving. I reached the end of the hall, the door to the stairway on my right, the elevator on my left. I stopped for a moment, panting, trying not to let the sound of splintering wood back down the hall rattle my judgment. Murphy sagged against me, speechless now. If she was breathing, I couldn't tell. There was no way I was going to be able to carry her down the stairs. Neither one of us had enough left to manage that. The ambulance would be arriving in minutes, less, and if I didn't have Murphy down there when it arrived, I might as well just leave her on the floor to die. I grimaced. I hated elevators, but I pushed the button and waited. Round lights over the elevator doors began counting up to 5. Down the hall from me, the splintering sound stopped, and something crashed into my office door, rattling it on its frame. Hell's bells, Harry, I thought out loud. I looked up at the lights. 2. A pause approximately 10 centuries long. 3. Hurry up, I snarled and jabbed the button 100 times more. Then I remembered the bracelet of shields around my right wrist. I tried to focus on it, but couldn't, with it twisted awkwardly beneath Murphy, supporting her. So I lay her down as gently as I could, lifted my left hand, and focused on the bracelet. The lower third of my office door exploded outwards, and the brown, gleaming form of the scorpion bounded across the hallway and into the wall. It was bigger now. The damn thing was growing. It bounced off the wall with a scrabbling, horrible agility, oriented on me, and hurtled down the hall towards me as fast as a man could run, its legs clicking and scuttling furiously across the floor. It leapt at me, claws extended, stinger flashing. I focused my will on the defensive shield the bracelet helped me form and maintain, struggling to get it together before the scorpion hit me. I did it, barely. The invisible shield of air met the scorpion a hand's breadth from my body and sent it rebounding back onto its back. There it struggled for a second, awkward and flailing. Behind me, the elevator door dinged, and the doors swooped graciously open. Without time to be delicate, I grabbed Murphy's left wrist and hauled her into the elevator with me, jabbing at the button for the lobby. In the hall, the scorpion thrashed its tail and righted itself, oriented on me with an uncanny intelligence, and flew towards me again. There wasn't any time to get my shield together again. I screamed. The elevator doors swooped shut again. There was a sharp thud, and the car rattled as the scorpion smashed into them. The car started down while I tried to regain my breath. What the hell was that thing? It wasn't just an insect. It was too fast, too darn smart for that. It had ambushed me, waiting until I'd set my weapons aside, until it had come after me. It had to be something else, some kind of power construct, built small but designed to draw in energy, to get bigger and stronger. An orthopod version of Frankenstein's monster. It wasn't really alive, just a golem. A robot, a programmed thing with a mission. Victor must have figured out where his talisman had gotten to, and set a spell on it to attack and come after anyone it came in contact with. Crazy bastard. Murphy had stumbled right into it. It was still growing, getting faster and stronger and more vicious. Getting Murphy out of danger wasn't enough. I had to find a way to deal with the scorpion. I didn't want to, but I was the only one on the block who could. There was too much potential danger involved. What if it didn't stop growing? I had to kill it before it got out of control. The lights on the elevator panel kept counting down, 4 to 3 to 2, and then the elevator shuddered and ground to a stop. The lights flickered and went out. "Oh, crap," I said. "Not now, not now." Elevators hate me. I jabbed at the buttons, but nothing happened. A second later, there was a cough of smoke, and the lights behind the buttons went out too, leaving me in darkness. The emergency lighting came on just for a second, but there was a pop of a burning filament, and that went away too. Murphy and I were left huddling in the darkness on the floor. Overhead, outside in the elevator shaft, there was the sound of shrieking metal. I looked up at the invisible roof of the elevator car in the darkness. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. Then there was a rattling bang, and something the weight of a small gorilla landed on the roof of the elevator. There was a second silence, and then something started a deafening tearing at the roof. "You have got to be kidding me," I shouted, but the scorpion wasn't. It was wrenching back the roof to the elevator, rattling the bolts and supports, making it groan. Dust rattled down in the darkness. unseen grit for my unseeing eyes. We were sardines in a can, waiting to be torn up and eaten. I got the feeling that if the thing stung me now, the poison would be redundant. I would bleed to death before it became an issue. "Think, Harry," I shouted at myself. "Think, think, think!" I was stuck in a frozen elevator, handcuffed to an unconscious friend who was dying of poison, while a magical scorpion the size of some French cars was trying to tear its way into me and rip me apart. I didn't have my blasting rod or my staff. The other gizmos I brought with me to the varsity were drained and useless, and my shield bracelet could only prolong the inevitable. A long strip of metal stripped away from the roof, letting in a strip of dim light, and I looked up at the scorpion's underbelly, saw it wedge a claw into the breach, and start to tear it open wider. I should have smashed it when it was just a bug. I should have taken it off my shoe and smashed it right there on my desk. My heart leapt into my throat as the thing tilted up and drove an exploratory pincher down into the upper third of the elevator, then started tearing the hole even larger. I gritted my teeth and started drawing in every ounce of power that I had. I knew it was useless. I could direct a firestorm up at the thing, but it would slag the metal it was on, and it would come raining back down on us and kill us, make the elevator shaft too hot to survive. But I wasn't going to let that thing have me either, by God. Maybe if I did it just right, I could catch it as it leapt, minimize the damage that I did to the surrounding scenery. That was the problem with me not being too great at evocation. Plenty of speed, plenty of power, not much refinement. That's what the staff did, and the blasting rod. They were designed to help me focus my power, give me pinpoint control. Without them, I might as well have been a suicide soldier carrying a dozen grenades strapped to his belt and ready to jerk out and pin. And then it occurred to me. I was thinking in the wrong direction. I swung my eyes down from the ceiling to the elevator's floor, pressed my palms against it. Bits of something rained down on my head and shoulders, and the clinking and scuttling of the scorpion got louder. I took all the power I'd drawn in, focused it beneath my palms. There was airspace beneath the elevator, in the elevator shaft. And that's what I reached for. Air, instead of fire. This was a simple spell, one I'd done hundreds of times before, I told myself. It wasn't any different from calling my staff to my hand, just a little bigger. "Vinto Soritas," I shouted, pouring every bit of strength, every ounce of anger, every shred of fear I had into the spell. And beneath the elevator, the winds rose up at my call, a solid column of air that caught the bottom of the elevator like a giant's palm and hurtled it upwards through the darkness of the elevator shaft. The brakes squealed, threw off sparks, and fell to pieces that dropped through the hole the scorpion had torn, to land next to me. The force of it pressed me down to the floor with a groan. There was a long and rising whine as the car accelerated up the elevator shaft. I hadn't meant for there to be quite that much wind, I thought, and prayed that I hadn't just killed me and Murphy both. The elevator hurtled up and up and up, and I could feel my face sagging down with the speed of it. The building my office was in is 12 stories high. We'd started on the second floor, so assuming an average of 9 feet per story, it was almost 100 feet to the building's roof. The car shot up it in less than a half dozen of my frantic heartbeats, slammed past the blocks at the top of the line, and hammered into the roof of the shaft like a bell on the strongman's sledgehammer game at the amusement park. The impact crushed the scorpion into the concrete with a series of sharp popping sounds as chitinous plates cracked and splintered, flattening it into shapeless brown splotch. Colorless goo, the ectoplasm of magically created mass, spattered out between the crushed plates and slid down into the car. At the same time, Murphy and I were hurled up, meeting the goo halfway. I kept Murphy in the shelter of my body, trying to stay between her and the roof, and my back hit it hard enough to make me see stars. We tumbled loosely back down to the elevator's floor in a sprawl of limbs, and Murphy groaned beneath me when I landed on her. I lay still for a moment, stunned. The scorpion was dead. I killed it, crushed it between the elevator and the roof of the shaft, and drenched myself and Murphy in ichor doing it. I'd saved our lives from the murderous device against the odds. But I just couldn't shake the nagging impression I was forgetting something. There was a little groan from the elevator, and then it shuddered, and started sliding back down the shaft, no longer supported by the powerful but short-lived pillar of wind that had come driving up there. We were falling back down the way we had come, and I had the feeling we weren't going to have a much better time at the bottom than the Scorpion had at the top. Now was the time for the bracelet, and I didn't waste a heartbeat grabbing Murphy close to me and bringing the shield into being around us. I only had a couple of seconds to focus, to think. I couldn't make the globe around us too brittle, too strong, or we'd just smash ourselves against the inside of it in the same way we would if we just rode the elevator down. There had to be some give to it, some flexibility to distribute the tremendous force of the abrupt stop at the first floor. It was dark, and there wasn't much time. Murphy and I rose up to the center of the space of the elevator while I pushed the shield out all around us, filled up the space with layer after layer of flexible shielding, semi-cohesive molecules of air, patterns of force meant to spread the impact around. There was a sense of pressure all around me, as though I had been abruptly stuffed with styrofoam packing peanuts. We fell, faster and faster. I sensed the bottom of the shaft coming. There was an enormous sound, and I held onto the shield with all of my might. When I opened my eyes again, I was sitting on the floor of the shattered, devastated elevator, holding a sagging, unconscious Murphy. The elevator doors gave a warped, gasping little ding, and then shuddered open. A pair of EMTs with emergency kits in hand stood staring at the elevator, at Murphy and me, their jaws hanging open to their knees. Dust billowed everywhere. I was alive. I blinked at it all, somewhat stunned. I was alive. I looked down at myself, at my arms and legs, and they were still all there. Then I let my head fall back and howled out a defiant laugh, a great, gawping whoop of primal joy. "Take that, Victor Shadow Man!" I shouted. "Ha! Ha! Give me your best shot, you murderous bastard! I'm going to take my staff and shove it down your throat!" I was still laughing when the EMTs gathered me up, helping me and Murphy toward the ambulance, too stunned to ask any questions. I saw them both give me wary looks, though, and then trade a glance with one another that said they were going to sedate me with something as soon as they got the chance. "The champion!" I howled, still on an adrenaline rush the size of the Colorado River, as they helped me out towards the ambulance. I thrust my fist into the air, scarcely noting or caring that my bracelet of silver shields had turned into a blackened ring of curled and wilted links, burned to uselessness by the energies I had forced through it. "I am the man, Shadow Man. You better put your head between your legs and kiss your—" The EMTs helped me outside, into the rain. The wet slabs of raindrops on my face shut me out, made me cold sober faster than anything else in the world could have done. I was suddenly acutely aware of the handcuffs around my wrist still, of the fact that I did not have Victor's talisman to use to turn his own power against him. Victor was still out there, out at his lake house. He still had a hank of my hair, and he was still planning to rip my heart out as soon as he possibly could, when the storm gave him the strength he needed. I was alive, and Murphy was alive, but my elation was premature. I didn't have anything to be celebrating yet. I lifted my face to the sky. Thunder growled, near at hand. Lightning danced overhead, somewhere in the clouds, casting an odd light and spectral shadows through the roiling overcast. The storm had arrived. Raindrops pelted down around me, the big splashy kind you only see in the spring. The air grew thicker and hotter, even with the rain falling. I had to think fast, use my head, be calm, hurry up. Murphy's handcuffs were still fastened to her wrist. Both of us were coated in dust that was stuck to the stinking, colorless goo, the ectoplasm that magic called from somewhere else whenever generic mass was called for in a spell. The goo wouldn't last long. Within a few more minutes, it would simply dissipate, vanish into thin air, return to wherever it had come from in the first place. For the moment, it was just a rather disgusting, slimy annoyance. But maybe one that I could put to use. My own hands were too broad, but Murphy had delicate little lady's hands, except where practice with her gun and her martial arts staff routines had left calluses. If she heard me thinking that, and had been conscious, she would have punched me in the mouth for being a chauvinist pig. One of the EMTs was babbling into a headset while the other was on Murphy's other side, supporting her along with me. It was the only chance I was going to get. I hunched over Murphy's diminutive form and tried to shroud what I was doing with the dark folds of my black duster. I worked at her hand, squeezing her limp, slimy fingers together and trying to slip the steel loop of the handcuffs over her hand. I took some skin off of her, and she groaned a lot, but I managed to get the cuffs off her wrist just as the EMT and I sat her down on the curb next to the ambulance. The other EMT ran to the back of the ambulance and swung it open, rummaging around inside. I could hear sirens, both police cars and fire engines, approaching from all directions. Nothing's ever simple when I'm around. She's been poisoned, I told the EMT. The wound site is on her right upper arm or shoulder. Check for a massive dose of brown scorpion venom. There should be some anti-venom available somewhere. She'll need a tourniquet and... Buddy, the EMT said, annoyed. I know my job. What the hell happened in there? Don't ask, I said, glancing back at the building. The rain came down more heavily by slow degrees. Was I too late? Would I be dead before I could get to the lake house? You're bleeding, the EMT told me. Without looking up from Murphy, I looked down at my leg, but it didn't start hurting until I actually saw the injury and remembered I had it. The scorpion's claw had ripped me pretty good, opening a 6-inch tear at the leg of my sweats and a comparable gash in the leg beneath, ragged and painful. Sit down, the EMT said. I'll take care of it in a second. He wrinkled up his face. What the hell is this stinking shit all over her? I wiped rain from my hair, slicking it back. The other EMT came running with a bottle of oxygen and a stretcher, and they both bent over their work with Murphy. Her face had discolored, pale in parts, too brightly red in others. She was as limp as a wet dollar, except for the occasional shudder or flinch. Quivers of her muscles that came from nowhere pained her for a moment and then apparently vanished. It was my fault Murphy was there. It had been my decision to hold information away from her that compelled her to take direct action, to search my office. If I'd just been more open, more honest, maybe she wouldn't be lying there right now, dying. I didn't want to walk away from her. I didn't want to turn my back on her again and leave her behind me, alone. But I did. Before the support units arrived, before police started asking questions, before the EMTs began looking around for me and giving my description to police officers, I turned on my heel and walked away. I hated myself, every step. I hated leaving before I knew if Murphy would survive the scorpion's venomous sting. I hated that my apartment and my office building had been trashed, torn to pieces by demons and giant insects, by my own clumsy power. I hated to close my eyes and see the twisted, mangled bodies of Jennifer Stanton and Tommy Tom and Linda Randall. I hated the sick twisting of fear in my guts when I imagined my own spare frame torn asunder by the same forces. And most of all, I hated the one responsible for it, Victor Sells. Victor, who was going to kill me as soon as the storm grew. I could be dead in another 5 minutes. No, I couldn't. I got a little more excited as I thought about the problem and looked up at the clouds. The storm had come in from the west and was only now going over the city. It wasn't moving fast. It was a ponderous roller of a thunderstorm that would hammer the area for hours. The Sells Lake House was to the east, around the shore of Lake Michigan, maybe 30 or 40 miles away, as the crow flies. I could beat the storm to the lake house if I was fast enough, if I could get a car. I could get out to the lake house and challenge Victor directly. My rod and staff were gone, dropped when the scorpion attacked. I might have been able to call them down from my office with winds, but as worked up as I was, I might accidentally blow out a wall if I tried. I didn't care to be crushed by hundreds of pounds of flying brick, called to my outstretched hands by the strength of my magic and my fury. My shield bracelet was gone too, burned out by countering the tremendous force of the impact of the falling elevator. I still had my mother's pentacle talisman at my throat, the symbol of order, of controlled patterns of power that was at the heart of white magic. I still had the advantage of years of formal training. I still had the edge and experience in sorceress confrontations. I still had my faith. But that was about all. I was weary, battered, tired, hurt, and I had already pulled more magic out of the hat in one day than most wizards could in a week. I was pushing the edge already, both in mystic and physical terms. But it just didn't matter to me. The pain in my leg didn't make me weaker, didn't discourage me, didn't distract me as I walked. It was like a fire in my thoughts, my concentration burning ever more brightly, more pure, refining my anger, my hate, into something steel-hard, steel-sharp. I could feel it burning and reached for it eagerly, shoving the pain inside to fuel my incandescent anger. Victor Shadowman was going to pay for what he'd done to all those people, to me and to my friends. Damn it all, I was not going to go out before I caught up to that man and show him what a real wizard could do. It didn't take me long to walk to McAnally's. I came through the door in a storm of long legs, rain, wind, flapping duster, and angry eyes. The place was packed. People sitting at every one of the 13 stools at the bar, at every one of the 13 tables, leaning against most of the 13 columns. Pipe smoke drifted through the air in a haze, stirred by the languidly spinning blades of the ceiling fans. The light was dim, candles burning at the tables and in sconces on the walls, plus a little gray stormlight sliding in through the windows. The light made the carvings on the columns vague and mysterious, the shadows changing them in a subtle fashion. All of Mac's chessboards were out on the tables, but my sense of it was that those playing and watching the games were trying to keep their minds off of something that was disturbing them. They all turned to stare at me as I came in the door and down the steps, dripping rainwater and little blood on the floor. The room got really quiet. They were the have-nots of the magical community. Hedge magi without enough innate talent, motivation, or strength to be true wizards. Innately gifted people who knew what they were and tried to make as little of it as possible. Dabblers, herbalists, holistic healers, kitchen witches, troubled youngsters just touching their abilities and wondering what to do about it. Older men and women, younger people, faces impassive or concerned or fearful, they were all there. I knew them all by sight, if not by name. I swept my gaze around the room. Every one of the people I looked at dropped their eyes, but I didn't need to look deep to see what was happening. Word has a way of getting round between practitioners of magic, and the arcane party line was working as it usually did. Word was out. There was a mark on my head, and they all knew it. Trouble was brewing between two wizards, white and black, and they had all come here to the shelter offered by McAnally's winding spaces and disruptive configurations of tables and columns. They'd come here to shelter until it was over. It didn't offer any shelter to me, though. McAnally's couldn't protect me against a sharply directed spell. It was an umbrella, not a bomb shelter. I couldn't get away from what Victor would do to me unless I cared to flee to the Never-Never itself. And for me, that was more dangerous in some ways than staying at Mac's. I stood there in the silence for a moment, but said nothing. These people were associates, friends of a casual sort, but I couldn't ask them to stand beside me. Whatever Victor thought he was, he had the power of a real wizard, and he could crush any of these people like a boot could a cockroach. They weren't prepared to deal with this sort of thing. "Mac," I said finally. My voice fell on the silence like a hammer on glass. "I need to borrow your car." Mac hadn't quit polishing the bar with a clean white cloth when I entered, his spare frame gaunt in a white shirt and dark breeches. He hadn't stopped when the room had grown still, and he didn't stop when he pulled the keys out of his pocket and tossed them to me with one hand. I caught them and said, "Thanks, Mac." Mac said. He glanced up at me and then behind me. I took the gesture for the warning it was and turned. Lightning flashed outside. Morgan stood silhouetted in the doorway at the top of the little flight of stairs, his broad frame black against the gray sky. He came down the stairs toward me, and the thunder came in on his heels. Rain had made little difference in the lay of his dull brown and gray hair, except for changing the texture of curl in his warrior's ponytail. I could see the hilt of the sword he wore beneath his black overcoat. He had a muscular, scarred hand on it. "Harry Dresden," he said, "I finally figured it out. Using storms to kill those people is insanely dangerous, but you are just the sort of ambitious fool who would do it." He set his jaw in a hard line. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing at a table. The people sitting at it cleared away, fast. "We're going to stay here, both of us, and I'm going to make sure you don't have the chance to use the storm to hurt anyone else. I'm going to make sure you don't try your cowardly tricks until the council decides your fate." His gray eyes glittered with grim determination and certainty. I stared at him. I swallowed my anger. The words I wanted to throw back at him
the spell I wanted to blast him out of my way with, and spoke gently. "Morgan, I know who the killer is, and he's after me next. If I don't get to him and stop him, I'm as good as dead." His eyes hardened, a fanatic's gleam. He spoke in two sharp little explosions of single syllables. "Sit down." He drew the sword out from its scabbard by a couple of inches. I let my shoulders sag. I turned toward the table. I leaned against the back of one of the chairs for a moment, taking a little weight off my injured leg, and drew the chair out from the table. Then I picked it up, spun in a half circle with it to gather momentum, and smashed it into the warden's stomach. Morgan tried to recoil, but I caught him off guard, and the blow struck home, hard and heavy with the weight of Mac's handmade wooden chair. In real life, the chair doesn't break when you slug somebody with it, like in the movies. The person you hit is the one who breaks. Morgan doubled forward, dropping to one hand and one knee. I didn't wait for him to recover. Instead, as the chair bounced off his ribs, I used the momentum of it to spin all the way around in a complete circle in the other direction, lifting the chair high, and brought it smiting down over the other man's back. The blow drove him hard into the floor, where he lay, unmoving. I sat the chair back at the table and looked around the room. Everyone was staring, pale. They knew who Morgan was, what his relationship to me was. They knew about the council and my precarious stance with it. They knew that I had just assaulted a duly appointed representative of the council in pursuit of the execution of his duty. I'd rolled the stone over my own grave. There wasn't a prayer I could convince the council. I wasn't a rogue wizard fleeing justice now. Hell with him, I said out loud, to no one in particular. I hadn't got time for this. Mac came out from behind the bar, not moving in a hurry, but not with his usual laconic lack of concern either. He knelt by Morgan and felt his throat, and peeled back an eyelid and peered at the man. Mac squinted up at me and said, expressionless, "Alive." I nodded, feeling some slight relief. However much of an ass Morgan was, he had good intentions. He and I wanted the same thing, really. He just didn't recognize that. I didn't want to kill him, but I had to admit, in some gleeful little corner of my soul, that the look of shocked surprise on his arrogant face as I hit him with a chair was a sight worth remembering. Matt stopped and picked up the keys where I dropped them on the floor as I swung the chair. I hadn't noticed that I had. Mac handed them back to me and said, "Council will be pissed." "Let me worry about that." He nodded. "Luck, Harry." Mac offered me his hand, and I took it. The room was silent, fearful, worried eyes watching me. I took the keys and walked up, out of the light and shelter of McAnally's, into the storm, my bridges burning behind me.
Please insert the next CD to continue this story.
I drove for my life. Mac's car was an '89 Trans Am, pure white, with a big 8-cylinder engine. The speedometer goes to 130 miles an hour. In places I went that fast. The falling rain made the roads dangerous at that speed I was driving, but I had plenty of incentive to keep the car moving as quickly as possible. I was still riding the steel hard edge of anger that had carried me away from the ruins of my office and through Morgan. The sky grew darker, a combination of building banks of storm clouds in the approaching dusk. The lighting was strange, greenish, and the leaves of the trees, as I left the city, were standing out too sharply, too harshly. The yellow of the lines in the road too dim. Most of the cars I saw had their headlights on, and streetlights were clicking alight as I barreled down the highway. Fortunately, Sunday evening isn't a busy one as far as traffic goes. I'd have been dead any other night. I must also have been driving during the watch rotation for the highway patrol, because not one of them tried to pull me over. I tried to tune in the weather station on the radio, but gave it up. The storm, plus my own agitation, was creating a cloud of squealing feedback on the radio speakers, but nothing intelligent about the storm. I could only pray that I was going to get over to Lake Providence before it did. I won. The curtains of rain parted for me as I whipped past the city limit signs for Lake Providence. I hit the brakes to slow for the turn onto the lakefront road that led to the Sells house, started hydroplaning, turned to the slide with more composure and ability than I really should have had, and got the vehicle back under control in time to slide onto the correct road. I pulled into the Sells gravel driveway,
On the swampy little peninsula that stretched out into Lake Michigan, the Trans Am slid to a halt in a shower of gravel and a roar of the mighty engine, then sputtered and gasped to silence. I felt for a giddy second and a half, like Magnum. Blue Beetle aside, I could get into this sports car thing. At least it lasted long enough for me to get to the Sells place. Thanks, Mac, I grunted and got out of the car. The gravel driveway leading back to the lake house was half sunken in water from the recent storms. My leg hurt me too much to run very fast, but I set off down the drive at a long-legged lope, rapidly eating the distance to the house. The storm loomed before me, rolling across the lake toward the shore. I could see columns of rain, dimly lit by the fading light, falling into its waters. I raced the storm to the house. As I did, I drew every bit of power and alertness that I could, keyed myself to a tighter level, tuned my senses to their sharpest pitch. I came to a halt 20 yards shy of the house and closed my eyes, panting. There could be magical traps or alarms strewn about, or spiritual or shrouded guardians invisible to the naked eye. There could be spells waiting, illusions meant to hide Victor Sells from anyone who came looking. I needed to be able to see past all that. I needed to have the edge of every scrap of knowledge I could get. So I opened my third eye. How can I explain what a wizard sees? It isn't something that lends itself readily to description. Describing something helps to define it, to give it limits, to set guardrails of understanding around it. Wizards have the sight since time began, and they still don't understand how it works, why it does what it does. The only thing that I can say is that I felt as though a veil of thick cloth had been lifted from me as I opened my eyes again. And not only from my eyes, but from all of my senses. I could abruptly smell the mud and the fish odor of the lake, the trees around the house, the fresh scent of the coming rain preceding the storm on the smoke-stained wind. I looked at the trees, saw them, not just the first green coat of spring, but in the full bloom of summer, the splendor of the fall and the barren desolation of winter, all at the same time. I saw the house, each separate part of it with its own component, the timbers as parts of spectral trees, the windows as pieces of distantly sandy shores. I could feel the heat of summer and the cold of winter in the wind coming off the lake. I saw the house wreathed in ghostly flames, and knew that those were in at least part of its future, that fire lay down several of the many paths of possibility that lay ahead in the next hour. The house itself was a place of power. Dark emotions, greed, lust, hatred, all hung over its visible things, molds and slimes that were strewn over it like Spanish moths with malevolent eyes. Ghostly things, restless spirits, moved around the place, drawn to the sense of fear, despair, and anger that hung over it. Mindless shades that were always to be found in such places, like rats in granaries. The other thing I saw over the house was a grinning, empty skull. Skulls were everywhere. Wherever I looked, just at the edge of my vision, silent and still and bleach white, as solid and real as though a fetishist had scattered them around in anticipation of some bizarre holiday. Death. Death lay in the house's future. Tangible, solid, unavoidable. Maybe mine. I shuddered and shoved the feeling away. No matter how strong the vision, how powerful the image gained with the sight, the future is always mutable, always something that could be changed. No one had to die tonight. It didn't have to come to that, not for them and not for me. But a sick feeling had settled into me as I looked on this darkling house, with all of its stinking lust and fear, all of its horrid hate worn openly upon it to my sight, like a mantle of flayed human skin on the shoulders of a pretty girl with gorgeous hair, luscious lips, sunken eyes, and rotting teeth. It repulsed me, and it made me afraid. And something about it, intangible, something I couldn't name, called to me, beckoned. Here was power. Power I had thrust aside once before, in the past. I had thrown away the only family I'd ever known to turn away power exactly like this. This was the sort of strength that could reach out and change the world to my will, bend it and shape it to my desiring, could cut through all the petty trivialities of law and civilization and impose order where there was none, guarantee my security, my position, my future. And what had been my reward for turning that power aside thus far? Suspicion and contempt from the very wizards I had acted to support and protect. Condemnation from the White Council, whose laws I'd clung to when all the world had been laid at my feet. I could kill the Shadow Man, now, before he knew I was here. I could call down fury and flame on the house and kill everyone in it, not leave one stone upon another. I could reach out and embrace the dark energy he had gathered in this place, draw it in and use it for whatever I wanted, and the consequences be damned. Why not kill her now? Violet light, visible to my sight, throbbed and pulsed inside the windows, power being gathered and prepared and shaped. The Shadow Man was inside, and he was gathering his might, preparing to unleash the spell that would kill me. What reason had I to let him go on breathing? I clenched my fists in fury, and I could feel the air crackle with tension as I prepared to destroy the lake house, the Shadowman, and any of the pathetic underlings he had with him. With such power, I could cast my defiance at the council itself, the gathering of white-bearded old fools without foresight, without imagination, without vision. The council, and that pathetic watchdog Morgan, had no idea of the true depths of my strength. The energy was all there, gleeful within my anger, ready to reach out and reduce to ashes all that I hated and feared. The silver pinnacle that had been my mother's burned cold on my chest, a sudden weight that made me gasp. I sagged forward a little and lifted my hand. My fingers were so tightly crushed into fists that it hurt to try to open them. My hand shook, wavering, and began to fall again. Then something strange happened. Another hand took mine. The hand was slim, the fingers long and delicate, feminine. The hand gently covered mine and lifted it like a small child's until I held my mother's pentacle in my grasp. I held it in my hand, felt its cool strength, its ordered and rational geometry. The five-pointed star within the circle was the ancient sign of white wizardry, the only remembrance of my mother. The cold strength of the pentacle gave me a chance, and a moment to think again, to clear my head. I took deep breaths, struggling to see clear of the anger and hate and the deep lust that burned within me for vengeance and retribution. That wasn't what magic was for. That wasn't what magic did. Magic came from life itself, from the interaction of nature and the elements, from the energy of all living things, and especially of people. A man's magic demonstrates what sort of person he is, what is held most deeply inside of him. There is no truer gauge of a man's character in the way he employs his strength, his power. I was not a murderer. I was not like Victor Sells. I was Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden. I was a wizard. Wizards control their power. They don't let it control them. And wizards don't use magic to kill people. They use it to discover, to protect, to mend, to help, not to destroy. The anger abruptly evaporated. The burning hate subsided, leaving my head clear enough to think again. The pain in my leg settled into a dull ache, and I shivered in the wind in the first droplets of rain, miserable. I didn't have my staff, and I didn't have my rod. The trinkets I did have with me were either expended or burned to uselessness. All I had was what was inside of me. I looked up, suddenly feeling smaller and very alone. There was no one near me, no hand touching mine. No one stood close by. For just a moment I thought I smelled a whiff of perfume, familiar and haunting, and then it was gone. And the only one I had to help me was myself. I drew out a breath. Well, Harry, I told myself, that's just going to have to be enough. And so I walked through the spectral landscape littered with skulls, into the teeth of the coming storm, to a house covered in malevolent power, throbbing with savage and feral mystic strength. I walked forward to face a murderous opponent who had all the advantages, who stood prepared and willing to kill me from where he stood within the heart of his own destructive power, while I was armed with nothing more than my own skill and wit and experience. Do I have a great job or what? The sight of Victor's lake house will always be with me. It was an abomination. It looked innocuous enough, physically, but on a deeper level, it was foul, rotten. It seethed with negative energy, anger and pride and lust, especially lust. Lust for wealth, lust for power, more than physical desire. Shadowy spirit beings that weren't wholly real, only manifestations of the negative energy of the place, clung to the walls, the rain gutters, the porch, the windowsills, glutting themselves on the negative energy left over from Victor's spell casting. I was guessing that there was a lot of it. He didn't strike me as someone who would be able to make sure his spells were energy efficient. I limped up the front steps. My sight revealed no alarms, no sorcerous tripwires. I might be giving Victor Shadowman too much credit. He was as powerful as a full-blown wizard, but he didn't have the education. Muscles, not brains. That was Victor Shadowman. I had to keep that in mind. I tried the front door, just for the hell of it. It opened. I blinked, but I didn't question the good fortune, or the overconfidence that had seen to it that Victor left his front door standing unlocked. Instead, I took a breath, gathered up what will I had, and pressed inside. I forget how the house was furnished or decorated. All I remember is what the sight showed me. More of the same as the outside, but more concentrated, more noxious. Things clung everywhere. Things with silent, glittering eyes and hungry expressions. Some reptilian, some more like rats, some insectoid. All of them were unpleasant, hostile, and shied away from me as I came in, as the aura of energy I held in readiness around me touched them. They made quiet noises, things I would never have heard with my ears, but the sight encompasses all of that. There was a long, dark hallway coated with the things. I advanced slowly, quietly, and they oozed and crept and slithered from my path. The dark purple light of magic that I had seen from the outside was ahead of me and growing brighter. I could hear music playing and recognized it as the same music that had been playing on the CD player at the Madison in Tommy Tom's suite when Murphy had asked me there on Thursday. Slow, sensuous music, steady rhythm. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening. I heard sounds. The quiet whisper being repeated over and over, a man's voice repeating an incantation, holding a spell for readiness for release. That would be Victor. I heard soft sighs of pleasure from a woman, the Beckett's, I could only assume so. And in a rumble that I could feel through the soles of my boots, I heard thunder over the lake. The low, chanting voice took on an edge of vicious, spiteful satisfaction and continued incantation. I gathered up what energy I had and stepped around the corner, out of the hallway, into the spacious room that stretched up to the full height of the house without interruption, yards of open air. The room below was a living room. A spiral staircase wound its way up to what looked like a kitchen and dining room on a sort of platform or balcony above the rest of the room. The elevated deck of the back of the house must have been accessible from the platform. There was no one in the main room. The chanting and the occasional sigh came from the platform above. The CD player was down in the room beneath, music flowing from speakers that were covered with an image of fire and dozens of bloated, disgusting creature forms feeding on the music as it came out. I could see the influence of the music as a faint, violet mist in tune with the light coming from the platform above. This was a complex ritual spell, then, involving many base elements coordinated by a central wizard, Victor. Tricky. No wonder it was so effective. It must have taken Victor a lot of trial and error to figure it out. I glanced up at the platform, then crossed the room, keeping as far away as I could from the CD player. I slipped under the platform without making any noise, and dozens upon dozens of slimy, non-physical spirit things oozed from my path. Rain increased to a dull, steady rhythm outside, on the roof and on the wooden deck and against the windows. There were boxes stacked all around me, plastic cases and cartons and cardboard boxes and wooden crates. I opened the nearest one and saw inside at least 100 slender vials like the ones I'd seen before, full of the liquid 3i. Beneath the vision of my sight, it looked different, thick and cloudy with possibility, potential disaster lurking in every vial. Faces twisted in horror and torment swam through the liquid, ghostly images of what might be. I looked in the other boxes. In one, ancient liquor bottles, full of an almost luminescent green liquid. Absinthe? I leaned closer, sniffing, and could almost taste the madness that swam latent in the liquid. I leaned back from the boxes, stomach churning. I checked the other boxes quickly. Ammonia, reminiscent of hospitals and mental wards. Peyote mushrooms and plastic Tupperware, I was familiar with them. Alum, white and powdery. Antifreeze. Glitter in 100 metallic shades in a huge plastic bag. Other things, deeper in the shadows that I didn't take time to look at. I had already figured out what all the articles were for. Potions. Ingredients for potions. This is how Victor was making the 3i. He was doing the same thing I did when I made my little potions, but on a grander scale, using energy stole from other places, other people. He used absinthe as a base and moved out from there. Victor was mass-producing what amounted to a magical poison, one that probably remained inert until it was inside someone, interacting with their emotions and desires. That would explain why I hadn't noticed anything about it before. It wouldn't have been obvious to a cursory examination, or to anything short of fully opening up my sight. And that wasn't something I did very often. I closed my eyes, shaking. The sight was showing me too much. That was always the problem with it. I could look at these ingredients, the cases of the finished drug, and catch flash images of exactly how much suffering could be caused. There was too much. I was starting to get disoriented. Thunder came again, more sharply, and above me. Victor's voice rose in pitch to something audible. He was chanting in an ancient language, Egyptian, Babylonian. It didn't really matter. I could understand the sense of the words clearly enough. They were words of hate, malevolence. They were words that were meant to kill. My shaking was becoming more pronounced. Was it only the effects of the sight? The presence of so much negative energy reacting with me? No. I was simply afraid. Terrified to come out of my hiding place under the platform and meet the master of the slithering horde that was draped all over everything in sight. I could feel his strength from here, his confidence, the force of his will infusing the very air with a sort of hateful certainty. I was afraid with the same fear that a child feels when confronted with a very large, angry dog, or with a neighborhood bully, the kind of fear that paralyzes, makes you want to make excuses and hide. But this was no time for hiding, no time for excuses. I had to act. So I forced my sight closed and gathered my courage as best I could. Thunder roared outside, and there was a flash of lightning, the two happening close together. The lights flickered, and the music skipped a track. Victor screamed out the incantation in a kind of ecstasy above me. The woman's voice, presumably Mrs. Beckett's, rose to a fevered pitch. He pays your money and he takes your chances, I muttered to myself. I forced my will, extended my right arm and open palm to the stereo equipment and shouted, "Fuego!" A rush of heat from my hand exploded into flame from the far side of the room and engulfed the stereo, which began to emit a sound more like a long, tortured scream than music. Murphy's handcuffs still dangling from my wrist, one loop swinging free. Then I turned, extended my arms, and roared, "Veneche!" Wind swept beneath me, making my duster billow like Batman's cloak, lifting me directly up to the platform above and over its low railing, into the suspended room. Even expecting the sight, it rattled me. Victor was dressed in black slacks, a black shirt, black shoes, very stylish, especially compared to my sweaty pants and cowboy boots. His shaggy eyebrows and lean features were highlighted eerily in the dark light, following up from the circle around him, where the implements of his ritual spell were ready to complete the ceremony that would kill me. He had what looked like a spoon, its edges sharpened to razor keenness, a pair of candles, black and white, and a white rabbit, its feet bound with red cord. One of its legs was bleeding from a small tear, staining the white fur, and tied against his head with the cord was a lock of my own dark, straight hair. Over to one side was another circle, laid out in chalk above the carpeting, maybe 15 feet across. The Becketts were inside, wreathing together in madness, sweating desire, generating energy for Victor's spell. Victor stared at me in shock as I landed upon the balcony, wind whipping around me, roaring inside the small room like a miniature cyclone, knocking over potted plants and knickknacks. "You!" he shouted. "Me," I confirmed. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about, Vic." His shock transformed into snarling anger in a heartbeat. He snatched up the sharpened spoon, raised it in his right hand, and screamed out words of the incantation. He dragged the rabbit in front of him, the ceremonial representation of me, and prepared to gouge out its, and therefore my, heart. I didn't give him the chance to finish it. I reached into a pocket and hurled the empty plastic film canister at Victor Shadowman. As a weapon, it wasn't much, but it was real. It had been hurled by a real person, a mortal. It could shatter the integrity of a magic circle. The canister went through the air above Victor's circle and broke it, just as he completed the incantation and drove the spoon blade down at the poor rabbit. The energy of the storm came whipping down the cylinder of focus created by Victor's now flawed circle. Power shattered out into the room, wild, undirected and unfocused, naked color and raw sound spewing everywhere with hurricane force. It sent objects flying, including Victor and me, and shattered the secondary circle the Becketts were in, sending them rolling and bumping across the floor and into one wall. I braced myself against the guardrail and held on as the power raged around me, charging the air with raw, dangerous magic, surging about like water under pressure, seeking an outlet. "You bastard!" Victor screamed into the gale. "Why don't you just die?" He lifted a hand and screamed something at me, and fire washed across the place between us, instant and hot. I tapped some of the ample power now available in the room and formed a hard, high wall in front of me, squeezing my eyes shut to aid in concentration. It was a dozen times harder to shield without my bracelet, but I blocked the flame, sent it swirling high and over me, huddled over the little quarter dome of hardened air that would not let Victor's magic past it. I opened my eyes in time to see the flames touch the ceiling beams and set them alight. The air was still thrummed with energy as the wash of flame passed. Victor snarled when he saw me rise, lifted a hand to one side, and snarled out words of summoning. A crooked stick that looked like it might have been some kind of bone soared through the air toward him, and he caught it in one hand, turning to me with the attitude of a man holding a gun. The problem with most wizards is they get too used to thinking in terms of one venue, magic. I don't think Victor expected me to rise, lurch across the trembling floor towards him, and drive my shoulder into his chest, slamming him back into the wall with a satisfying thud. I leaned back a little and drove my knee toward his gut. Missed, and got him square between the legs instead. The breath went out of him in a rush, and he doubled over to the ground. By this time I was screaming at him, senseless and incoherent. I started kicking at his head. I heard a metallic, ratcheting sound behind me and spun my head in time to see Beckett, naked, point an automatic weapon at me. I drew myself to one side and heard a brief explosion of gunfire. Something hot tore at my hip, spinning me into a roll, and I kept going, into the kitchen. I heard Beckett snarl a curse. There was a number of sharp clicking sounds. The automatic had jammed. Hell, with this much magic flying around the room, we were all lucky the thing hadn't just exploded. Victor, meanwhile, shook the end of the bone tube he held, and a half-dozen dried brown scorpion husks fell out into the carpeting. His whiter-than-white teeth flashed in his boater-brown face, and he snarled, "Scorpies, scorpies, scorpies!" His eyes gleamed with lust and fury. One of my legs wasn't answering my calls to action, so I crab-walked backwards into the kitchen on the heels of my hands and one leg. Out on the dining section of the balcony, the scorpion shuddered to life and started to grow. First one, and then the others, oriented on the kitchen and started toward me in scuttling bursts of speed, getting larger as they came. Victor howled in glee. The Becketts rose, both naked, lean, and savage-looking, both sporting guns, their eyes empty of everything but a wild sort of bloodlust. I felt my shoulders press against the counter. There was a rattle, and then a broom fell down against me, its handle bouncing off my head and landing on the tile floor beside me. I grabbed at it, my heart pounding somewhere around my throat. A room full of deadly drug. One evil sorcerer on his home turf, two crazies with guns, one storm of wild magic looking for something to set it into an explosive motion. And half a dozen scorpions, like the one I'd already survived earlier, rapidly growing to movie monster size. Less than a minute on the clock, and no timeouts remaining for the quarterback. All in all, it was looking like a bad evening for the home team. I was so dead. There was no way out of that kitchen, no time to use an explosive evocation in close quarters, and the deadly scorpions would rip me to pieces well before Victor could blow me up with an explosive magic, or one of the blood-maddened Becketts could get their guns working long enough to put a few more bullets in me. My hip was beginning to scream with pain, which I suppose was better than the deadly dull numbness of more serious injuries and shock. But at the moment it was only the least of my worries. I clutched the broom to me, my only pitiful weapon. I didn't even have the mobility to use it. And then something occurred to me, something so childish that I almost laughed. Instead I plucked a straw from the broomstick and began a low, steady chant, a bobbing about in the air with the fingers that held the straw. I reached out and took hold of the immense amounts of untapped energy running rampant in the air and drew them into a spell. "Politas," I shouted, bringing the chant to a crescendo. "Politas, politas!" The broom twitched, it quivered, it jerked upright in my hands, and then it took off across the kitchen floor, its brush waving menacingly to meet the scorpion's advance. The last thing I had expected to use that cleaning spell for, when I had laboriously been forced to learn it, was to use it against a tide of poisonous scorpion monsters, but any port in a storm. The broom swept into them with a ferocious energy and started flicking them across the kitchen, towards the rest of the balcony with tidy, efficient motions. Each time one of the scorpions would try to dodge around it, the broom would tilt out and catch the beastie before it could, flick it neatly into its back, and continue about its job. I'm pretty sure it got all the dirt on the way, too. When I do a spell, I do it right. Victor screeched in anger when he saw his pets, still too small to carry such mass, being so neatly corralled and ushered off the balcony. The Becketts lifted their guns and opened fire on the broom, while I hunkered down behind the counter. They must have been using revolvers now, because they fired smoothly in an ordered rhythm. Bullets smacked into the walls and the counters and the back of the kitchen, but none of them came through the counter that sheltered me. I caught my breath, pressing my hand against the blood on my hip. It hurt like hell. I thought the bullet was stuck somewhere by the bone. I couldn't move my leg. There was a lot of blood, but not so much that I was sitting in a puddle. Out on the balcony, the fire was beginning to catch, spreading over the roof. The entire place was going to come crashing down before much longer. "Stop shooting! Stop shooting, damn you!" Victor screamed, and the gunfire came to a halt. I risked peeking over the counter. My broom had swept the scorpions off the edge of the balcony and to the floor of the room below. As I watched, Victor caught the broom by its handle and broke it over the balcony railing with a snarl. The straw still held in my fingers broke with a sharp little twang, and I felt the energy fade from the spell. Victor Shadowman snarled. "A cute trick, Dresden," he said, "but pathetic. There's no way you can survive this. Give up. I'd be willing to let you walk away." The Becketts were reloading. I ducked my head down before they got any funny ideas, and hoped they didn't have heavier rounds that could penetrate the counters I hid behind, and whatever contents they contained, to kill me. "Sure, Vic," I replied, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "You're known for your mercy and sense of fair play, right?" "All I have to do is to keep you here until the fire spreads enough to kill you," Victor said. "Sure, let's all die together, Vic. Too bad about your inventory down there, though, huh?" Victor snarled and pitched another burst of flame into the kitchen. This time it was much easier to cover myself, half-shielded as I was already by the corner of the counters I hid behind. "Oh, cute," I said, my voice dripping with scorn. "Fire's the simplest thing you can do. All the real wizards learn that in the first couple of weeks and move on up from there." I looked around the kitchen. There had to be something else, some way I could escape, but nothing presented itself. "Shut up!" Victor snarled. "Who's the real wizard here, huh? Who's the one with all the cards? And who's the one bleeding out on the kitchen floor? You're nothing, Dresden, nothing. You're a loser. And do you know why?" "Gee," I said, "let me think." He laughed, harshly, Because you're an idiot. You're an idealist. Open your eyes, man. You're in the jungle now. It's survival of the fittest, and you've proved yourself unfit. The strong do as they wish, and the weak get trampled. When this is over, I'm going to wipe you off my shoe and keep going like you never existed. Too late for that, I told him. I was in the mood to tell a white lie. The police know all about you, Vic. I told them myself, and I told the White Council, too. You've never even heard of them, have you, Vic? They're like the Super Friends and the Inquisition, all rolled into one. You'll love them. They'll take you out like yesterday's garbage. God, you really are an ignorant bastard. There was a moment's silence, then, "No," he said. "You're lying. You're lying to me, Dresden." "If I'm lying, I'm dying," I told him. Hell, as far as I knew, I was. "Oh, and Johnny Marconi, too. I made sure he knew who and where you were." "Son of a bitch," Victor said. "You stupid son of a bitch. Who put you up to this, huh? Marconi? Is that why he pulled you off the street?" I had to laugh weakly. A bit of flaming cabinet fell off the upper shelf onto the tiles next to me. It was getting hot in there. The fire was spreading. "You never figured it out, did you, Vic?" "Who?" Victor screamed at me. "Who was it, damn you? That whore, Linda? Her whore friend, Jennifer?" "Strike two, strike three, and the other side gets a chance to steal," I said back. Hell, at least if I could keep him talking, I might keep him in the house long enough to go down with me. And if I could make him mad enough, he might make a mistake. "Stop talking to him," Beckett said. "He's not armed. Let's kill him. Get out of here before we all die." "Go ahead," I said in a cheerful tone. "Hell, I've got nothing to lose. I'll send up this whole house in a fireball that'll make Hiroshima look like a hibachi. Make my day." "Shut up," Victor shouted. "Who is it, Dresden? Who, damn you?" If I gave him Monica, he might still be able to get to her if he got away. There was no sense risking that, so all I said was, "Go to hell, Vic." "Get the car started," Victor snarled. "Go out through the deck doors. The scorpions will kill everything on the first floor." I heard a motion in the room, someone moving about the doors onto the elevated deck at the back of the house. The fire continued to spread. Smoke rode the air in a thick haze. "I've got to go, Dresden," Victor told me. His voice was gentle, almost a purr. "But there's someone I want you to meet first." I got a sick, twisty little feeling in the pit of my stomach. "Gal Shazak," Victor whispered. Power thrummed. The air shimmered and shone, began to twist and spiral. "Shel Sazak," Victor whispered again, louder, more demanding. I heard something, a warbling hiss that seemed to come from a great distance, rushing closer. The black wizard called the name for the third and final time, his voice rising to a screech. "Gal Shazak!" There was a thunder crack in the house, a dull and sulphurous stench, and I craned my neck to see over the counter, risking a glance. Victor stood by the sliding glass doors that led out into the wooden deck. Red-orange flame wreathed the ceiling on that side of the house, and smoke was filling the room below, casting the whole place in a hellish glow. Crouched down on the floor in front of Victor was the toad demon I had banished the night before. I had known that I hadn't killed it. You can't kill demons, as such, only destroy the physical vessels they create for themselves when they come into the mortal world. If called again, they can create a new vessel without difficulty. I watched in fascination, stunned. I had seen only one person call a demon before, and I had killed my own master shortly after. The thing crouched in front of Victor, its lightning blue eyes whirling shades of scarlet hate, staring up at the black-clad wizard, trembling with the need to tear into him, to rend and destroy the mortal being who had dared summon it forth. Victor's eyes grew wider and more mad, glittering with fevered intensity. Sweat ran down his face, and he tilted his head slowly to one side, as though his vision were skewed along the horizon, and by the motion he could compensate for it. I gave silent thanks that I had closed my third eye when I did. I did not want to see what the thing really looked like, and I did not want to get a good look at the real Victor Selves either. The demon finally gave a hiss of frustration and turned towards me with a croaking growl. Victor dropped back his head and laughed, his will triumphant over the being he had called from beyond. "There, Dresden, do you see? The strong survive, and the weak are torn to little pieces." He flapped his hand at me and said to the demon, "Kill him." I struggled to my feet, supporting my weight on the counter, to face the demon as it rose and began its slow stalk towards me. "My God, Victor," I said, "I can't get over how clumsy you are." Victor's smile immediately became a snarling sneer once again. I saw fear touch the corners of his eyes, uncertainty even though he was on top. I felt a little smile quirk my lips. I moved my gaze to the demons. "You shouldn't just hand someone else a demon's name," I told him. Then I drew in a breath and shouted out in a voice of command, "Kalshazak!" The demon stopped in his tracks and gave a whistling howl of agony and rage as I called its name and drew my will up to hurl against it. "Kalshazak!" I snarled again. The demon's presence was suddenly there, in my head, raging there, slippery and slimy, wriggling like a venomous tadpole. It was a pressure, a horrible pressure on my temples that made me see stars and threatened to steal enough of my balance to send me falling on the floor. I tried to speak again, but the words stuck in my throat. The demon hissed in anticipation, and the pressure on my head redoubled, trying to force me down, to make me give up the struggle, at which point the demon would be free to act. The lightning blue of its eyes became glaringly bright, painful to look upon. I thought of little Jenny Sells, oddly enough, and of Murphy, lying pale and unconscious on a stretcher in the rain, of Susan crouched next to me, sick and unable to run. I had beaten this frog once. I could do it again. I cried out the demon's name for the third and final time, my throat burning and raw. The word came out garbled and imperfect, and in a sinking moment I feared the worst. But Kalshazak howled again and hurled itself ferociously to the floor, thrashing its limbs about like a poisoned bug, raging and tearing great swaths of the carpet. I sagged myself, and the weariness came over me, threatening to black me out. "What are you doing?" Victor said, his voice rising to a high-pitched shriek. "What are you doing?" He was staring at the demon in horror, backing slowly towards the doors out. "Kill him! I am your master! Kill him! Kill him!" The demon howled in rage, turned its burning glare to me, and then Victor, as though trying to decide who to devour first. Its eyes settled on Victor, who went pale and ran for the doors. "Oh, no, you don't," I muttered, and I uttered the last spell I could manage. One final time, on the last gasps of my power, the winds rose and lifted me from the earth. I hurtled into Victor like an ungainly cannonball, driving him away from the doors, past the demon as it made an awkward lunge at us, and towards the railing of the balcony. We fell in a confused heap at the edge of the balcony that overlooked the room beneath, full of dark smoke and the red glow of flame. The air had grown almost too hot to breathe. Pain jolted through my hip, more bright and blinding than anything I had ever imagined, and I sucked in a breath. The smoky air burned and made me choke and gasp. I looked up. Fire was spreading everywhere. The demon was crouching between us and the only way out. Over the edge of the balcony there was only chaos and flame and smoke. Strange, dark smoke that should have been rising, but instead was mostly settling on the floor, like London fog. The pain was too great. I simply couldn't move. I couldn't even take enough breath to scream. "Damn you!" Victor screamed. He regained his feet and hauled me up towards his face with berserk strength. "Damn you!" he repeated. "What happened? What did you do?" "The fourth law of magic forbids the binding of any being against its will," I granted out. Pain was something tight around my throat, making me fight to speak the words. "So I stepped in and cut your control over it, and didn't establish any of my own." Victor's eyes widened. "You mean?" "It's free," I confirmed. I glanced at the demon. "Looks hungry." "What do we do?" Victor said. His voice was shaking, and he started shaking me, too. "What do we do?" "We die," I said. "Hell, I was going to do that anyway, but at least this way I get to take you out with me." I saw him glancing at the demon, then back to me, eyes terrified and calculating. "Work with me," he said. "You stopped it before. You can stop it again. We can beat it together and leave." I studied him for a moment. I couldn't kill him with magic. I didn't want to. And it would only have brought a death sentence on my head in any case. But I could stand by and do nothing. And that's exactly what I did. I smiled at him, closed my eyes, and did nothing. "Fuck you, then, Dresden," Victor snarled in response to me. "It can only eat one of us at a time, and I'm not going to be the one to get eaten today." And he picked me up to hurl me towards the demon. I objected with fragile tenacity. We grappled, fire raged, smoke billowed. The demon came closer, lightning eyes gleaming through the hell-lit gloom. Victor was shorter than me, stockier, better at wrestling, and he hadn't been shot in the hip. He levered me up and almost threw me, but I moved quicker, whipping my right arm at his head and catching him with the flailing free end of Murphy's handcuffs, breaking his motion. He tried to break away, but I held on to him, dragged him in a circle to slam against the guardrail of the balcony, and we toppled over. Desperation gives a man extraordinary resources. I flailed at the balcony railing and caught it at the base, keeping myself from going over into the roiling smoke below. I shot a glance below me and saw the glistening brown hide of one of the scorpions, its stinging tail held up like a mast of a ship cutting through smoke at least 4 feet deep. The room below was filled with angry, clicking, scuttling sounds. Even in a single desperate glance, I saw a couch torn to pieces by a pair of scorpions in less time than it took to take a breath. They loomed over it, their tails waving in the air like flags from the back of golf carts. Hell's bells. Victor had grabbed onto the railing a little above me, and to the left, and he stared at the oncoming demon with a face twisted with hatred. I saw him drawing in a breath and try to plant a foot firmly enough to free one hand to point at the oncoming demon, to draw some kind of magical attack or defense. I couldn't allow Victor to get out of this. He was still whole. If he could knock the demon down, he might still slip out. So I had to tell him something that would make him mad enough to try to take my head off. "Hey, Vic," I shouted, "it was your wife. It was Monica that ratted on you." The words hit him like a physical blow. His head whipped around towards me, his face contorted in fury. He started to say something to me. The words of a spell meant to blow me to bits, but the toad demon interrupted him by rearing up its head with an angry hiss and snapping its jaws down over Victor's collarbone and throat. Bone broke with audible snaps, and Victor squealed in pain, his arms and legs shuddering. He tried to push his way down, away from the demon, and the creature's balance wobbled. I gritted my teeth and tried to hold on. A scorpion leapt at me, brown and gleaming, and I drew my legs up out of reach of the pincers, just barely. "Bastard!" Victor cried, struggling uselessly against the demon's jaws. There was blood running down his body, fast and hot. The demon had hit an artery, and it was simply holding on, wavering at the edge of the balcony as Victor struggled and started kicking at my near hand. He hit me once, twice, and my balance wavered, my grip slipping. A quick glance below me showed me another scorpion ready to jump at me, this one closer. "Murphy," I thought, "I should have listened to you. If the scorpions didn't kill me, the demon would. If the demon didn't, the fire was going to kill me. I was going to die." There was a certain peace into thinking that, in knowing that it was all about to be over. I was going to die. It was as simple as that. I had fought as hard as I could, done everything I could think of, and it was over. I found myself, in my final seconds, idly wishing I could have had time to apologize to Murphy, that I could apologize to Jenny Sills for killing her daddy, and I could apologize to Linda Randall for not figuring out things fast enough and saving her life. Murphy's handcuffs lay tight and cold against my forearm as monsters and demons and black wizards and smoke closed in all around me. I closed my eyes. Murphy's handcuffs. My eyes snapped open. Murphy's handcuffs. Victor swung his foot at my left hand again. I kicked with my legs and hauled with my shoulders to give me a second of lift. I grabbed Victor Sell's pant leg with my left hand. With my right, I flipped the free end of the handcuffs around one of the bars of the guardrail. The ring of metal cycled around its hinge and locked into place. Then I started to fall back down. I hauled hard on Victor's leg. He screamed, a horrible, high-pitched squeal as he started to fall. "Kalshazek,
finally overbalanced by the added weight and leverage I had added to Victor's struggles, pitched over the balcony guardrail and onto the smoke below, crashing down to the floor, carrying Victor with him. There was a rush of scuttling, clicking sounds, a piercing whistle hiss from the demon. Victor's screams rose to something high-pitched and horrible until he sounded more like an animal, a pig squealing at slaughter than a man. While I swung from the balcony, my feet several feet above the fray, held suspended in an acutely painful fashion by Murphy's handcuffs, one loop around my wrist, the other locked around the balcony railing. I looked down as my vision started to fade. I saw a sea of brown, gleaming plates of segmented chitinous armor. I saw the scorpion's stinging tail flashing down over and over again. I saw the lightning eyes of Kalshazak's physical vessel, and saw one of them pierced and put out by the flashing sting of one of the scorpions. And I saw Victor's cells, stuck over and over again by stingers the size of ice picks, the wounds foaming with poison. The demon ignored the pinchers and the stingers of the scorpions to begin tearing him apart, his face contorted in final agony of rage and fear. The strong survive, and the weak get eaten. I guess Victor had invested in the wrong kind of strength. I didn't want to watch what was happening below. The fires consuming the ceiling above were rather beautiful, actually. Rolling waves of flame, cherry red, sunset orange. I was too weak to try to get out of this mess, and the entire thing had become far too annoying and painful to even consider anymore. I just watched the flames and waited, and noticed, oddly, that I was simply starving. And no wonder. I hadn't eaten a decent meal in Friday. You notice odd things in the final moments, they say. And then you start seeing things. For instance, I saw Morgan come through the sliding glass doors leading in from the outside deck, the silver sword of the White Council's justice in his hands. I saw one of the scorpions, now the size of a German shepherd, figure out the stairs, scuttle up them, and hurtle at Morgan. I saw Morgan's silver sword slash, snicker snack, and leave the scorpion in writhing pieces on the floor. Then I saw Morgan, his expression grim, his height making the fire-chewed balcony shudder, come for me. His eyes narrowed when he saw me, and he lifted his sword, leaning far over the balcony railing. The blade flashed bright silver in the firelight as it started to come down. Typical was my last thought. How perfectly typical. To survive everything the bad guys could do, and get taken down by the people whose cause I had been fighting for. I awoke somewhere cool and dark, in tremendous pain, coughing my lungs out. Rain was falling on my face, and it was the greatest feeling I'd ever known. Morgan's face was over mine, and I realized he'd been giving me CPR. You. I coughed and spluttered and spat up, wheezing for breath. Morgan watched me for a moment, then scowled and stood up, eyes flickering around. I managed to get enough wind to speak, and said numbly, "You saved me." He grimaced. "Yes. But why?" He looked at me again, then stooped to pick up his sword and to slip it into the scabbard at his side. "Because I saw what happened in there. I saw you risk your life to stop the Shadowmen, without breaking any of the laws. You weren't the killer." I coughed some more and said, "That doesn't mean you had to save me." He turned and blinked at me as though puzzled. "What do you mean? You could have let me die." His hard expression never changed, but he said, "You weren't guilty. You're a part of the White Council." His mouth twisted as though the words were fresh lemons. "Technically, I had an obligation to preserve your life. It was my duty." "I wasn't the killer," I said. "No." "So," I wheezed, "that would make me right, and then that would make you—" Morgan scowled. "More than ready to carry out the doom if you cross the line, Dresden. Don't think this has gotten you off the hook as far as I'm concerned." "So, if I remember correctly, as a warden, it is your duty to report on my conduct to the council, isn't it?" His scowl darkened. "So, you're going to have to go to them on Monday and tell them all about what really happened, the whole truth, nothing but the truth." "Yes," he snarled. "It is even possible they will lift the doom." I started laughing.
weakly. "You haven't won, Dresden. There are many on the council who know full well you have consorted with powers of darkness. We, at least, will not relax our vigil on you. We will watch you day and night. We will prove you are a danger who must be stopped." I kept laughing. I fell over on my side. I laughed so much. Morgan arched an eyebrow and simply stared at me. "Are you all right?" "Give me about a gallon of Listerine," I choked, "and I'll be just fine." Morgan just stared at me, and I laughed harder. He rolled his eyes and growled out something about the police being here any moment to provide medical care. Then he turned and stomped off into the woods, muttering to himself the whole way. The police arrived in time to catch the Becketts trying to leave, and arrested them for, of all things, being naked. Later, they were implicated in the 3i drug ring and prosecuted on distribution charges. Just as well for them that they're in the Michigan justice system. I don't think they would have come out of a cell alive if they'd been in Chicago. It wouldn't have been good for Johnny Marconi's business. The Varsity suffered a mysterious fire the night of my visit to it. I heard Marconi didn't have any trouble collecting the insurance money, in spite of all the odd rumors going around. Word hit the street that Marconi had hired Harry Dresden to take out the head of the 3i gang. One of those rumors that you can't trace back to any one person. I didn't try to deny it. It was a cheap enough price not to have to worry about anyone bombing my car. I was too hospitalized to show up to the meeting of the White Council, but it turned out that they decided to lift the doom of Damocles, which I had always thought a rather pretentious name in any case, from me, due to valorous action above and beyond the call of duty. I don't think Morgan ever forgave me for being a good guy. He had to eat crow in front of the whole council, relentlessly driven by his anal retentive sense of duty and honor. There's no love lost between us, but the guy was honest. I'll give him credit for that. And hell, at least I don't have to look forward to him popping out from nowhere every time I cast a spell. I hope. Murphy was in critical condition for nearly 72 hours, but she pulled through. They gave her a room right down the hall from me, in fact. I sent flowers to her hospital room, along with the surviving ring of her handcuffs. I told her in a note not to ask how the chain between the rings had been so neatly severed. I didn't think she'd buy that someone cut it with a magic sword. The flowers must have helped. The first time she got out of bed was to totter down the hall to my room, throw them in my face, and leave without saying a word. She professed to have no memory of what happened at my office, and maybe she didn't. But in any case, she got the warrant for my arrest rescinded, and a couple of weeks later, when she went back to work, she called me for advice the next day. And she sent a big check to cover my expenses in the murder investigations. I guess that means we're friends again, in a professional sense, but we don't joke anymore. Some wounds don't heal very quickly. The police found the remains of a huge 3i stash in what was left of the lake house, and Victor Sells eventually came up as the bad guy. Monica Sells and her children vanished into witness protection, and I hope they got a better life than they had before. I suppose it couldn't be much worse. Bob eventually came home again, more or less within the 24-hour limit, I suppose. I turned a deaf ear to rumors of a particularly wild party at the University of Chicago, which lasted from Saturday night to Sunday night, and Bob wisely never mentioned it. Date with a Demon was a headliner for the Arcane when it came out the following Monday, and Susan came by my hospital room to give me a copy and to talk to me about it. She seemed greatly amused by the cast that held my hips immobilized until the docs could be sure that there wasn't too much fracturing. The X-ray machine kept fouling up whenever they tried to use it on me, for some reason, and commented that it was a pity I wasn't more mobile. I used the sympathy factor to badger another date out of her, and she didn't seem to mind too much. That time, we were not interrupted by a demon, and I didn't need any of Bob's love potion, or advice, thank you very much. Mac got his Trans Am back. I got the Blue Beetle back. That didn't seem quite equitable, but at least the Beetle still runs. Most of the time. I made sure to send pizza out to Toot Toot and his fairy buddies every night for a week, and once a week ever since. I'm pretty sure the kid from Pizza Express thought I was loony, having him drop off a pizza by the roadside. Heck with him. I make good on my promises. Mister got a little short-changed on the whole deal, but it is well beneath his dignity to notice such things. And me? What did I get out of it? I'm not really sure. I escaped from something that had been following me for a long time. I'm just not sure what. I'm not sure who was more certain that I was a walking Antichrist waiting to happen. The conservative branch of the White Council, the men like Morgan, or me. For them, at least, the question has been partly laid to rest. For myself, though, I'm not so sure. The power is there. The temptation is there. That's just the way it's going to be. I can live with that. The world is getting weirder, darker every single day. Things are spinning around faster and faster and threatening to go completely awry. Falcons and falconers the center cannot hold. But in my corner of the country, I'm trying to nail things down. I don't want to live in Victor's jungle, even if it did eventually devour him. I don't want to live in a world where the strong rule and the weak cower. I'd rather make a place where things are a little quieter, where trolls stay the hell under their bridges, and where elves don't come swooping out to snatch children from their cradles, where vampires respect the limits, and where the fairies mind their P's and Q's. My name is Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden. Conjure it by your own risk. When things get strange, when what goes bump in the night flicks on the lights, when no one else can help you, give me a call. I'm in the book.
We hope you enjoyed Stormfront by Jim Bütchër. For other Buzzy Multimedia audio publications, please go to our website at www.mediafans.com. That's MEDIAFANS.